So we're going to do something that's a little different. And thank you, Ben, because we couldn't have done this without your help. So about 2 weeks ago, it was 2 weeks ago, I shared a lesson with you about what do Jewish rabbis think about the coming of Messiah. What do they think about the last days? And so this lecture or this lesson that you're about to see is about 35 minutes roughly. What you're about to see is from a rabbi who does not believe in Yeshua, in Jesus. And so, and what's going to be, I think, surprising to you, maybe not, is how much it's really exactly what I shared 2 weeks ago. And this is from a ministry, actually it no longer exists. It's called Jerusalem U. And I had actually emailed them like 7 years ago or so, 8 years ago, and I asked, can I show this? And they gave me permission, and then they went out of, they shut down. And so actually, so I have the video, but they don't exist anymore. So even though I got permission, we don't need permission anymore because they don't even exist. But I think you're going to really find this interesting. And so and we'll talk with whatever time we have when this is over. We can discuss it. There is a handout that I made as well. You probably got the one handout about smoke. And anyway, we'll look at that briefly. So thank you. Go for it. I actually show this video every year in my TKU class to the Jew First. So I've been doing that since 2017. I've been showing this.
There's an old Chinese curse that says, may you live in interesting times. And we certainly seem to be living in interesting times. So many big events are happening so quickly. There's a buzz in the air. There's a lot of expectation. People feel that big things are about to happen. And movies like 2012 only increase the interest in the topic. This presentation is about explaining what the Jewish perspective is on this whole scenario of the end of days. Where are things leading? When is it going to happen? What signs are we going to see in the world? What's the Jewish people's role in the story? And when do we think it's actually going to get to the end of this climactic sequence that we're all expecting to see in history? But before we talk about the end of history and the end of days and where we're going to be going, we need to rewind and go back to the beginning of the story to give a little bit of perspective on how Judaism views the whole purpose of creation, the plot of the story, the time frame, the Jewish people's role in it. So let's begin at the beginning. Jewish time actually begins from one very specific event. In Judaism, we start keeping time from day 6 of creation. And if you look in day 6, we see that what happened on that day? It was the creation of human beings. What's the lesson we learn from that? And if we use a movie director as an example, we understand exactly the point. Just like in a movie, the camera focuses on the lead actors, so too, by beginning the keeping of time from the creation of human beings, the lesson we learn is that the focus of creation is us. The story is about us. Okay, so the focus of creation might be us, but what's the plot? An actor doesn't walk onto a set and have no lines. He has to know what he's supposed to talk about. What are we here for? What's the purpose of creation? What are our lines? So Judaism teaches that the purpose of creation is pleasure. That might sound a little strange, but there's a lot of confusion about that word. The opposite of pleasure is not pain, it's comfort. And anyone who's ever played sports knows that there's no pain, no gain. So too with the pleasure principle. Anything that is truly meaningful for us requires a lot of work, a lot of effort, pain. And the more we put into something, the more we get out of it. And Judaism teaches that there are many different levels of pleasure. And each level of pleasure is exponentially so much greater than the level below it, like the Richter scale with earthquakes. Lowest level pleasure, physical pleasure. Love, real love, requires more work and is a higher level of pleasure. But the highest level, first-class pleasure, nothing else comes close, is relationship with God. Absolute transcendent connection. In Kabbalah, the term is called dveikut, complete connection. And nothing else in the world comes close to this relationship. No other pleasure in the world comes even remotely close to that. So the purpose of creation was relationship with God. And the Garden of Eden, and we always picture the Garden of Eden from Renaissance paintings, Adam and Eve sitting in this sort of tropical Club Med surroundings with the fig leaf strategically placed in the snake, the tree, and the apple. That's not what it was about. The Garden of Eden is synonymous with the ideal physical spiritual state, when human beings are free from all the things that distract them, and we have a lot of stuff distracting us in this world, free to do what our soul really wants, to go for first-class pleasure, relationship with God. It should have been the shortest, most straightforward story. God puts us in a perfect environment, and He programs our souls to want to have relationship with Him, and we spend the rest of time in the garden, happily ever after, movie over. It's an obvious point that we're not in the Garden of Eden. So what went wrong? If you think about it, if according to the pain is the pleasure, and the highest level pleasure is relationship with God, the hardest thing to build and maintain in this world is relationship with God. The beginning narrative in the Bible, after the creation story, is the story of basically humanity blowing that relationship. It's kind of like the ultimate divorce story. Humanity collectively said, I understand that the universe exists within God, but it's so hard to relate to God. He's not standing in front of me like I am before you. Basically, people said, I don't see God, but I see all the amazing things He created, the sun, the moon, the stars, the volcanoes, the ocean. I'll worship those things as a way of indirectly showing respect to God. But what happened after a number of generations? That relationship with God was lost. It was destroyed. And humanity degenerated into idolatry. The whole purpose of creation was lost. In the middle, we had that story that we're all familiar with, Noah's Ark and the flood, which we remember as a cute little kiddie story of Noah building the big boat and the animals and how did he tell the male mosquito from the female mosquito. But it's actually a very heavy story. God says use the world correctly or lose it. He wipes out the whole world, sparing only one man, Noah, hoping that he will repopulate the world with people that have a relationship with him, get humanity back on track. But it doesn't work. And humanity continues to degenerate spiritually and morally until we get to the Tower of Babel story, where humanity is united for all the wrong reasons, to rebel against God. And it looks like the game's over, but finally, at the last minute, one man comes along and he saves the day. And that one man is Abraham. I personally believe Abraham is not only the greatest Jew or proto-Jew, but arguably the greatest human being of all times. And I believe that he's great for two reasons. A, in a world that had totally lost connection with God, lost connection with the purpose of creation, Abraham, free-thinking super genius, is able to think outside the box and come to the realization that there is one infinite being God, one standard of morality, one ultimate purpose to creation. But the real greatness of Abraham is the second point. Imagine being the only person in the world to believe in an idea that no one else could comprehend or accept. Few of us would have the nerve to whisper to our best friends. And that's the real greatness of Abraham. He is totally committed to reality. He wants truth regardless of consequences. He is a true intellectual and a true idealist. He says, I choose to live and if necessary to die for living with the reality of God. Now it's an obvious point that God being infinite, you don't do anything for infinity. You don't live for God, you don't die for God, you don't do anything for God. But Abraham recognizes that without relationship with God, humanity is doomed. We're negating the whole purpose of creation. So he dedicates himself to a unique mission. And this is what chosen people is all about. And this is such an important concept in Judaism that so few people seem to understand. Chosen in a nutshell means Abraham says to God, God, I choose you. I choose to dedicate my life and the life of my descendants, the Jewish people, to one mission, to reconnecting humanity to relationship with you, to reconnecting humanity to spirituality, to absolute values. And God says back to Abraham, you're choosing me, Abraham, then I choose you back. You and your descendants, the Jewish people. What are they chosen for? It's not privilege, but rather responsibility. And what's this unique responsibility? In Hebrew, the term is called tikkun olam, fix the world. The ultimate cause of being the nation whose responsibility it is to teach the world about the purpose of creation, to elevate the world morally and spiritually, to get the world, so to speak, back to the garden.
So now we have a plot rewrite. Our original plot was humanity hangs out in the garden, building a relationship with God. First-class pleasure. Our new plot is humanity returns to God with the Jewish people spreading the message to the world.
This is not just the plot of Jewish history, it's the plot of all of human history. Now, while all of humanity is in the story, because of the choices that Abraham made and this notion of chosen people, the Jewish people have just a unique role to play in this narrative. But it involves all of humanity and all of human history. So now that we understand what our new plot is, humanity returns to God with the Jewish people leading the way, what's the time frame for the story? How long does it take? So in several places in the Talmud, it makes a definitive statement. It says that for 6,000 years, the world was created. And the exact quote from the Talmud and Sanhedrin says, the world is to exist for 6,000 years. In the first 2,000 years, there was desolation. 2,000 years, the Torah flourished. And the next 2,000 years are the Messianic era. But through our many iniquities, all these years have been lost. So let's see what this quote is saying. First of all, our time frame is 6,000 years. What does the 6,000 mirror? The 6 days of creation. Judaism is teaching that every day of creation is equivalent to 1,000 years. Sunday, Monday, 1,000, 2,000. Tuesday, Wednesday, 3,000, 4,000. Thursday, Friday, we have 5,000. And when you hit 6,000, you enter the 7th day. But we also see that the Talmud subdivides those 6,000 years into 3 2,000-year segments. The first 2,000 years is called desolation, the next 2,000 years is called Torah, and the third is called Messiah. What's interesting, by the way, is if you take this map laid out by the Talmud and lay it on top of the reality of what's unfolded in history, it actually fits remarkably well. The first 2,000 years is from the birth of Adam to the birth of Abraham. And we see that during that period of time, the whole world has no relationship with God. That's the point that I mentioned previously. The next 2,000 years, which is called Torah, goes basically from the birth of Abraham until the birth of Christianity. And during that period of time, the Jewish people will exist alone in the world as the only people believing in one God. And everyone is more or less calling us crazy. It's the pagan world versus the world's only monotheists, the Jews. That last 2,000 years, which is called Messiah, this is the period of time when humanity returns to God. And we see, in fact, and we haven't gotten to the end of that period yet, that in the last 1,800 years, we've had the greatest moral, spiritual transformation in human history, where today billions of people whose ancestors used to be a bunch of amoral polytheists now believe in a worldview that's essentially Jewish. What am I talking about here? The birth of Christianity and Islam, Christians and Muslims. So we see that that model laid out by the Talmud more or less is actually what's happened in human history. But of course we, since we're talking about the end of days, want to focus on that last period of time that's called Messiah. Because this is the period of time which we haven't gotten to the end of, and this is the period of time which is the edge of history that we now find ourselves in. This period of time is actually divided into 2 sections. The beginning of that last 2,000-year period called Messiah is normal history. But before we hit the year 6,000, we have a transitional period which is called the Messianic era. And we have to understand that the Messiah is initially a Jewish concept. The Messiah, we understand, is an individual who is a catalyst. His job is to prepare not just the Jewish people, but the entire world to enter that 7th millennia. And we know that in the Jewish week, which by the way begins on Sunday, and is not called Sunday in Judaism, but is rather called the first day. The second day is Monday. The third day is Tuesday. We're counting up. We get all the way up to the 6th day. When we enter the 7th day, we don't call it Yom Shvi'i, the 7th day. We call it Shabbat, the Sabbath. And we know the Sabbath is a different reality from the other 6 days of the week. So too we see in human history. We have 6,000 normal years of history, and then we have a 7th millennia, a 7th, so to speak, day of history, which is called Olam Haba in Hebrew, which translates to the world to come, which isn't where you go when you're dead, but is rather the period when humanity and the world returns back to the ideal state it was before the fall, back to the garden, so to speak. And Judaism, by the way, teaches that the Messiah has to come and complete the job before the year 6,000. It has to all be done by then. So what is this Messianic era? The great medieval Jewish scholar Maimonides, the Rambam, who lived over 800 years ago in Spain and later in Egypt, and he beautifully codifies all of Jewish worldview. He gives us a wonderful, clear description of what's going to be happening to the world during the Messianic era. He says, at that time there'll be no hunger and no war, no jealousy and no strife. The entire world will be entirely occupied to acquire the knowledge of God, as it says. The world will be full of the knowledge of God as the waters cover the seas. The whole world will unite for one purpose, to get back to relationship with God, first-class pleasure. So now we understand our time frame, how it all laid out, 6,000 years maximum till the Messianic era, and then that Sabbath of human history, the world to come. The question is, where are we in the world today in this scenario? The year 2010 corresponds to the year 5770 of the Jewish calendar. So where is 5770 in our story? So if we understand that every day of the week is 1,000 years, when we hit the year 5000, we're already in Friday, the 6th day. 5,500 is halfway through the entire hours of the day. 5,750, 3/4 of the way through the day. 5,770, late Friday afternoon on the edge of history, which leaves us with a maximum of 230 years till the story's over. And it's very important to emphasize that Judaism teaches that the story doesn't have to go to the maximum. The Messiah can come early and will most likely come before that day. Just as in a traditional Jewish home, the Sabbath is brought in before sunset, so too this scenario will reach its climax before we actually run out of time. So now that we understand the original purpose of creation, our new plot, humanity returns to God with the Jewish people leading the way, we have our time frame clear. Now we have to deal with a very important topic, which is prophecy, because that's what we're going to be looking at basically for the rest of this little talk.
What is it about prophecy that we need to focus on? What prophecy is really all about is transmitting vital information to the Jewish people and all of humanity. The prophecies of the past are more well known. For instance, that the Jewish people will be an eternal nation and yet will be exiled and scattered from one end of the earth to the other. But what I want to look at today are the prophecies of the future. To understand how relevant prophecy is even today, I want to start off by looking at a quote by a famous rabbi who lived in Europe pre-Holocaust, Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman. He was murdered by the Nazis in 1941. He wrote a book called Ikvasa de Mashiach, In the Footsteps of the Messiah, in which he says a very important quote that we need to see before we look at the prophecies that remain to be fulfilled.
If we wish to comprehend the nature of events in our lives, we must seek out those verses and teachings of the rabbis which relate to the period preceding the Messiah. That is the transitional period between the end of exile and the redemption. If we compare what is written to the events taking place, we will see a mirror image of everything that is happening to us. Everything mentioned in the Torah becomes concrete fact, and conversely, nothing is happening that was not predicted by the Torah in advance. What Rabbi Wasserman is saying is that everything that is going to be happening is all there within the text. We just have to look, and the whole end of days scenario is laid out before us. So now let's look at those prophecies that remain to be fulfilled. The first one is called tshuva, which means spiritual return. What does that mean specifically? Well, we look at the prophecy. It says in Deuteronomy, "And it shall come to pass, when all these things have come upon you, the blessings and the curses, you shall return to the Lord your God and obey his voice according to all that I have commanded you today, you and your children with all your heart and with all your soul." What does that mean specifically? That all the Jewish people, as we approach the end of days, will return to Judaism, return to Jewish knowledge, return to observance. Again, our great medieval scholar Maimonides spells this out very clearly when he says in his Mishnah Torah, "All the prophets have charged the Jewish people concerning tshuva," which means return. "Only through tshuva will Israel be redeemed, and the Torah already offered the assurance that Israel will, in the closing period of its exile, finally do tshuva and thereupon be immediately redeemed." Practically speaking, that means that all the Jewish people will return to keeping the Torah and to Jewish observance. There'll be no offshoots and Jews pursuing other religions and other spirituality in the world. Number two is a physical return. Not only will Jewish people return to Judaism, return to the Torah, return to observance, but the entire Jewish people will return to the land of Israel, as it says in Deuteronomy. "And he shall return and gather you from among all the nations. If your outcasts be at the utmost part of heaven, from there he will gather you. And the Lord your God will bring you into the land your fathers inherited. You will acquire, and he will make you even more prosperous and numerous than your fathers." What does that mean practically? That this entire diaspora experience of thousands of years of being scattered to the four corners of the earth will come to an end, and all the Jewish people will return to the land of Israel. No more Jews living in Los Angeles and New York and in Toronto and London and South Africa and Australia. All the Jewish people will be back in the land of Israel, and all the Jewish people will reconnect to Judaism. What else do we have? We have a scary scenario laid out in the Bible, Gog and Magog. This is the classic end of days, final showdown, good and evil scenario in the Hebrew Bible that, by the way, other religions such as Christianity in the book of Revelations are taken from this idea. It's described by the prophets Ezekiel and Zechariah over 2,500 years ago. And keep in mind when we look at these prophecies that obviously they're living 2,500 years ago. The countries that exist in the world today didn't exist back then. Okay, there's no France and Spain and the Arab world and America. The technology that exists in the world today didn't exist back then. There's no airplanes, there's no fighter planes and weapons of mass destruction and tanks and navies and you name it. But if you look at the big picture as described by these prophets, it's pretty clear the scenario that's being laid out. The first quote is a long quote from the prophet Ezekiel. Thus says the Lord God, behold, I am against you, Gog, the prince and leader of Meshech and Tuval. In the end of years you will come to a land restored from the sword, gathered from many nations upon the mountains of Israel that had lain desolate continuously, to a people who had been brought from the nations, all of them dwelling in security. You will attack, like a swarm you will come. You will be like a cloud covering the earth, you and all your cohorts and the many nations with you. Thus says the Lord God, surely on that day when my people Israel dwells securely, you will come to know, when you come from your places at the uttermost parts of the north, you and many people with you, all of them riding horses, a vast horde, a mighty army, and you advance against my people Israel like a cloud covering the earth. It will be at the end of days that I will bring you upon my land in order that the nations may know me. And then the prophet Zechariah adds to this prophecy when he says, the prophecy of the word of Hashem concerning Israel, behold, I make Jerusalem a cup of poison for all the peoples all around. Also Judah will be caught up in the siege of Jerusalem. It shall be on that day that I will make Jerusalem for all the peoples a burdensome stone, all whose bearers become lacerated, and all the nations of the world will gather against it. So what's the scenario we have so far? We have all the nations of the world uniting against the Jewish people after they return to the land of Israel, and Jerusalem is at the center of the conflict. The Zohar, which is the basic book of Jewish mysticism, adds to this prediction when it says, the children of Ishmael will go up at that time with the nations of the world against Jerusalem. And of course, the children of Ishmael, we know, are the Arab people. That's held as a Jewish tradition and as an Arab tradition. So the world unites against Israel, Jerusalem is at the center, and the Arabs are at the center of that attack against the Jewish people. That's what we have so far. So what other prophecies remain to be fulfilled? Number 4 is weapons of mass destruction. Now, while that term doesn't exist in the Hebrew Bible, it's pretty clear from the images described by the prophets that's definitely what they had in mind. If we look at the prophet Zechariah again from 2,500 years ago, he says, and there shall be a day that is known to God, which shall be neither day nor night. But it shall come to pass that at the evening time there shall be a light. And this will be the plague with which the Lord will strike all the nations that have gathered against Jerusalem. Their flesh will be consumed while they stand upon their feet, and their eyes will be consumed in their sockets, and their tongues will be consumed in their mouths. And what does that sound like? Certainly some kind of weapon of mass destruction, people melting. The prophet Yoel, also from thousands of years ago, writes, and I will show my wonders in heaven and on earth, blood and fire and Timrot Ashan. The sun will be turned into darkness and the moon to blood at the coming of the great and terrible day of the Lord. It's a very creepy prophecy. And I deliberately didn't translate those words Timrot Ashan because they require a little explanation. Here's the phrase in Hebrew. Ashan Ayin Shin Nun, Sophia in Hebrew, means smoke or cloud. Smoke. Timrot, every Hebrew word has a 3-letter root. The root of Timrot is Taf Mem Resh in Hebrew, which is Tamar. Tamar, we know, is a date palm. And it's being used as an adjective here. Blood, fire, and date palms of smoke. So what's a date palm of smoke? So there's the image of a date palm. And what does the date palm of smoke look like? It's pretty clear what we're talking about here. Number 5 is Hevle HaMashiach, the birth pangs of the Messiah. So what does this mean? So before we look at the exact explanation of this, let's look at a quote from the Chafetz Chaim. The Chafetz Chaim was, of course, one of the great leaders of Judaism in Europe pre-Holocaust, early 20th century. And in his book, Shem Olam, he says the following. The entire period of diaspora is like a pregnancy, and the end of the exile will be like the pangs of childbirth. This is what the Talmud in Shabbos called Hevle HaMashiach, which is the birth pangs of the Messiah. As our sages said, if you see suffering increasing and threatening to drown you like a river, expect him, the Messiah. This is the reason why troubles subside from time to time, because in childbirth, the labor contractions temporarily subside to give the woman brief respite. If women in labor did not have these short intervals of relief, they might die in childbirth, heaven forbid. But after an interval of respite, the contractions resume. It is just so in our times. What the Chafetz Chaim is telling us is this is what's going to be as we approach the end of days. Just as a woman in labor starts to have contractions and she knows that the baby's really going to come when the contractions become consistent and get closer and closer and more intense, so too as we approach the end of days, we're told that things are going to speed up and get more and more intense. So now we've seen the prophecies that remain to be fulfilled. Now, how do they stand up to what's going on in the world today? Before we look at that, I just want to rewind in time about a century to see how realistic this scenario would have looked in the world just 100 years ago. Let's say in the year 1900. This is an ancient history. 1900 for all of us is 2, maximum 3 generations ago in terms of our ancestors, our grandparents or our great-great-grandparents. So the scenario of the world coming together against Israel, weapons of mass destruction. If we could beam ourselves back to, let's say, Paris or London of 1900, what was the situation in Europe at the time? We see, number one, that there was tremendous peace and stability in the world. It was arguably the longest period of sustained peace in European history in a very long time. And of course, coming at the end of the Industrial Revolution and the Enlightenment, we had tremendous explosion of technology and quality of life and standard of living. Everything was moving forward. Huge feelings of peace and optimism in the world. By the way, there was no world coalitions. There was hyper-nationalism in 1900, but there was no League of Nations, no United Nations. None of these things existed back then. There was no mass communications even 100 years ago. We had the telegraph, but that was about it. There was certainly no Arab states, and there was little or no interest in the Middle East. The modern Middle East is a creation of the British and the French between the end of World War I and World War II. And going back to 1900, oil didn't even play a factor because no one was really using it back then. So this whole scenario of this giant conflict, world united, focused on the Middle East, Arab states, 100 years ago would have seemed ridiculous. But if we look at it from a Jewish perspective also, it seems very, very strange. Let's look at the Jewish people 100 years ago. Let's go to the Lower East Side of New York, which had one of the highest concentrations of Jewish immigrant population in the world. Where were the Jewish people going 100 years ago? Towards or away from Judaism? On the heels of the Enlightenment, we have a massive wave of assimilation of Jews. 2.5 million Jews will come to America between 1882 and 1914, and 90% of them will lose their Judaism. Massive amount of assimilation begins with this period of time. If you'd ask a sociologist or an anthropologist what's going to be with anti-Semitism, he would say, of course it's going to decline. A, because this is the modern world and we don't have these medieval superstitious attacks against the Jews, and B, because in 100 years, there's not going to be any Jews to hate. They're going to disappear. There was no state of Israel 100 years ago. There was the early Zionist movement, but 99.9% of the Jews were living in diaspora by that time. There was no large Jewish population living in the land of Israel. Palestine was a backwater province of the Ottoman Turkish Empire. Jerusalem was totally underdeveloped and politically insignificant. The notion of a Jewish people returning to their land, reconstituting their state, even from a Jewish perspective 100 years ago, to a Jew living in the Lower East Side of New York would have seemed very strange indeed. So 100 years ago, this entire scenario would have seemed more or less like a dream, a fantasy. So let's fast forward to today, just 100 years later, to see what's going on in the world today. And we see a huge change in just 100 years. Today we do have tremendous world unity. We have the United Nations, the European Union. We actually saw an event in 1991 that was unique in human history, where the entire world united to fight a war pretty much against one country, which is the first Gulf War. We have a global community today. Everything is so interconnected. Internet, air travel, globalization. It's one very small world. Israel has been reborn, and the Jewish people, after thousands of years of longing, have returned to their homeland in unprecedented numbers, where today almost half the Jews in the world are living in the land of Israel, and it is now believed to be the largest Jewish community on the planet Earth, which means there are more Jews living in Israel today than at any time since the destruction of the first temple 2,500 years ago. We have a Baal Tshuva movement, a movement of return to Judaism. Even 50 years ago, it was almost unheard of for a Jew to come back to Judaism. 100 years earlier, everyone was leaving. Yet today, there is no even relatively small Jewish community that does not have outreach. We have an explosion of anti-Semitism. Certainly the biggest anti-Semitic event in Jewish history has been the Holocaust, 1939 to 1945, coming out of the most enlightened country in Europe. And of course, anti-Semitism is still alive and well in the world. Led by the Arabs, the world has united against Israel. If you look at what goes on today in terms of UN votes, and 2/3 of all UN votes since 1990 have condemned Israel, basically it's the vast majority, 75-80% of the world, voting against Israel with a few countries abstaining, and pretty much the United States, Micronesia, and the Marshall Islands are the only countries that consistently support the Jewish state. As a matter of fact, the only thing standing between Israel and complete political isolation in the world today is in fact US support. And of course, if we look at this conflict in detail, we see that Jerusalem is in fact the center of this conflict. All the negotiations today between Israel and the Palestinians are always talking about construction in Jerusalem, housing demolition in Jerusalem, but more specifically, focusing on the Muslim holy sites on the Temple Mount, the Gold Dome, which is the Dome of the Rock, and the Black Mosque, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The last uprising, the Intifada as the Palestinians called it in 2000, was called the Al-Aqsa Intifada, focusing on the Muslim holy sites on the Temple Mount, and that's the image you always see in back of them when they speak, especially the Gold Dome. Of course, we have weapons of mass destruction today. We saw them developed during World War II and used against the Japanese, but in real terms in the Middle East, the greatest existential threat to Israel today is not Palestinian terrorism or rockets from Hamas or Hezbollah, but rather Iran going nuclear and constantly threatening to wipe Israel off the face of the earth.
Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad repeated inflammatory comments saying Israel would soon disappear, fueling speculation that he was threatening the Jewish state with a nuclear weapon.
And of course, Hevle HaMashiach, this whole scenario of everything speeding up and getting very intense. And as we look at history in general, and certainly the Jewish people's history, we see that things are moving very fast. We have, a Holocaust, World War II, 9/11, rebirth of Israel, boom, boom. These events are coming quicker and quicker and becoming more and more intense. And of course, the high-tech revolution, bringing all of this to our devices as it's happening almost live in real time. So if you put the whole picture together, it definitely looks scary. We're just a few headlines away from this convergence of biblical end-of-days scenario with the headlines that we're reading in the newspaper. And it seems like the challenges that face the Jewish people are extreme, the threats to Israel, the rising anti-Semitism. But we shouldn't lose hope, because if we look at human history and we look at Jewish history and we look at prophecy and we put it all together, we see that the Jewish people are a living supernatural phenomenon, that they've beaten all the odds. Think about it. No Las Vegas bookie looking at Jewish history as prophesied in the Bible would have given 1,000,000 to 1 odds of such a history taking place. Yet the Jewish people alive and well in the world today, and the miraculous rebirth of the state of Israel, and the incredible accomplishment of Jewish people throughout history is living proof of the supernatural and the validity of prophecy and its ability to come true. And even when things look bleak, Golda Meir, I think she said it best when she said, pessimism is an emotion the Jewish people can never afford to have. And the Jewish people don't need to be pessimistic, because we've beaten all the odds. The Jewish people are alive and well and accomplishing miraculous things daily. I think David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, probably summed it up better than anyone else when he said that a Jew who doesn't believe in miracles is not a realist. Now, when things are most intense, is the time when the Jewish people have to make that last maximum effort to work on Jewish unity, Jewish pride, Jewish education.
And when our non-Jewish friends ask what they can do, I tell them, if you see the power of prophecy as a force in shaping history and the reestablishment of the State of Israel, if you appreciate the central role the Jewish people play in history, if you understand what is at stake, then now is the time to act. At this decisive moment in mankind's history, support for Israel and the Jewish people is critical, not only for their sake, but for the sake of all humanity.
That's an amazing video, isn't it? Yeah. I think the best way that I can serve you is to go over some of the handouts that you have, because that way you'll have this information, and I can help you like get out of it. You know what I mean? Right. So there's a handout I gave you when you came in. The first time it was passed out is today. It says "Pillars of Smoke in the Last Days."
Have you found a mic?
Thank you.
Praise the Lord. So the handout, Pillars of Smoke in the Last Days. And, okay, so you'll notice I have Joel 2 on there, and he referred to Joel 2. And you'll notice verse 30, and I will show wonders in the heavens and in the earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke. Okay, notice the Hebrew word for pillars is that word tamara. He put that up. You saw it with the tamar, the palm tree and pillars of smoke. What's the word for smoke? It's the word ashan, and sometimes I like to say it like this: pillars of ash, ashan, ash. Can you just see how that would just kind of sound like it? And what's interesting is if you'll notice the word for pillars actually, and that's right out of Strong's, it actually says it's just a column that has a palm-shaped thing on the top. You could not describe a nuclear explosion better than that. Pillars of ash. But what does Peter do with that exact same verse in Acts 2? He calls it blood and fire and vapor of smoke. The word for vapor, notice what the word vapor is. Atmos, from which we get our English word atoms. Atoms of smoke. Okay? And this is a sign of the last days. So Peter's quoting Joel. That's just like, what do you do with that? Okay, so I taught a lesson in this room on November 18th, 2023. It was actually the first lesson, if you will. It was kind of the pre-Daniel series lesson. And in that lesson, which was a lot of content, and that's the lesson right there. And the question is, are nuclear weapons in the Bible? And I gave a whole lot more than what he did on that issue, because I was a launch control officer in the Air Force. I was the guy that would have inserted the keys and launched the ICBMs if we had launched them. And I wrote the lesson plan for the other launch control officers. So I kind of understand nuclear weapons. He referred to a verse in Zechariah chapter 14, verse 12, where he talks about their eyes will burn out of their sockets. I remember when the neutron bomb was invented. I was still in high school. I think I was a senior when that neutron bomb was invented, and the article in the Bergen Record paper said scientists are baffled by line in the Bible because it describes exactly the effects of a neutron bomb. So I thought and then the video is on the back, just the front and back if you want to be able to see it. And then on the large handout that we already looked at these pages, but now having seen the video, I want to reintroduce you to these pages. And I'll just spend a moment here, just going to show you stuff. On page 15, if y'all want to turn to page 15. I know I'm going quick, but I taught it. Now you watch the video, and now you have the handout that you're going to, so it's really going to help you. Okay. Notice on page 15, Peter says in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 3, knowing this first, that scoffers will come in the last days, walking according to their own lust and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. Peter says, scoffers, the word actually means fools. Okay, morons, fools. That's actually what it means. Okay? So scoffers are going to say, oh, they've always said the Lord's coming back. In other words, that statement is what Peter says is a foolish statement. Okay? In other words, they've always said he'll come. Peter says that's a foolish statement. And Peter said that 2,000 years ago. There have always been Jews who said Jesus, the Messiah, not Jesus, would not come until around the year 2000. Okay? That's why, so Peter says they're fools. Okay? We're living right now. Okay, now notice he referred to the Talmud. You got that on the bottom of that page. So the name of the tractate, the book within the 63 tractates, is called Sanhedrin 97 A. Sanhedrin is the name of the tractate. And notice that near the bottom, I put it in bold, so is the world, 1,000 years out of 7 shall be fallow. So, actually, let me just read the whole thing. 6,000 years shall the world exist, and 1,000, the seventh, it shall be desolate, as it is written, and the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day. Abai said, it will be desolate 2,000, as it is said, after 2 days he will revive us in the third, and he will raise us up, and we shall live in his sight, and it has been taught in accordance with Rabbi Katina, just as the 7th year is 1 year of release in 7, so is the world. 1,000 years out of 7 shall be fallow. As it is written, and the Lord shall be exalted in that day, as it is further said, a psalm and a song for the Sabbath day. Psalm 92 is the only psalm that mentions the Sabbath. That's why it says that there. Meaning the day that is altogether Sabbath. In other words, the entire 7,000 year, that entire 1,000 years, every moment of it must be Sabbath. In other words, you cannot have, what the Talmud is saying is, Messiah cannot come on the first day of that 7,000th year. Because anything, big or little, that needs to be done to turn that last 1,000-year period into a complete rest must already be fully completed. There can be no remnants of Armageddon. Nothing when that 7,000th year begins. That's what the Talmud is saying. Okay, the whole Gog war, there could be no remnants, no residue, nothing, or it's not really a Sabbath. The preparation day for the Sabbath has not been completed. It's not Sabbath. Does that make sense? So that's what this is saying here. It says, and the Lord alone shall be exalted. It shall be further said, a psalm and a song for the Sabbath day, meaning that the day is altogether Sabbath, as it is also said, for 1,000 years in thy sight, or as yesterday, when it is past. The Tanah Debe Eliyahu teaches, the world is to exist, and this is what he quoted now, 6,000 years. In the first 2,000, there was desolation. That's from Adam to Abraham. 2,000 years, the Torah flourished. That's from Abraham to Jesus, frankly. Okay? And the next 2,000 years is the Messianic era. The first 2,000 years, there's no Torah. The whole world is separate from God. The second 2,000 years, there is a Torah. So those are the Torah flourishing, and the last 2,000 years is monotheism. Going over to the next page, page 16. I'm just repeating stuff I already did, but having seen it and heard it before, I think it'll help you. So Midrash, which is just basically Jewish teaching, says 6 eons for going in and for coming out, for war and for peace. The 7th eon, now notice, entirely Shabbat. You can't have one moment of it that's not. Okay? The Zohar, which is the foundational work of mystical Kabbalah, says, in the 6th millennium, happy are those who will be left alive at the end of the 6th millennium to enter the Shabbat, which is the 7th millennium. Notice what he said as he was describing. The Sabbath is the only day that has a name. We have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. In Hebrew, you have the first day, the second day, the third day, the fourth day, the fifth day, the sixth day, and you have a day that has a name, the Sabbath. Okay? The Epistle of Barnabas, this is, most scholars will say the Epistle of Barnabas was written in the 1st century. There are some who will put it in the 2nd century, in the first half of the 2nd century. There are some. I don't think anybody puts it in the second half of the 2nd century. It's 1st century, maybe beginning of the 2nd century. And notice what he says in Barnabas 15:4. Barnabas does not belong in the Bible, no doubt about it, but it is interesting that this is what was being taught back then. Give heed, children, what this meaneth. He ended in 6 days, meaneth this, that in 6,000 years the Lord shall bring all things to an end, for the day with him signifieth 1,000 years, for he himself beareth me witness, saying, behold, the day of the Lord shall be as 1,000 years. Therefore, children, in 6 days, that is, in 6,000 years, everything shall come to an end. So I have been through a lot of school, and I'll tell you, I cannot tell you how many times I've heard scholars make fun of the idea that there are Christians who say that a day with the Lord is like 1,000 years, mean that there's 6,000 years. And I've heard countless scholars make fun of that. That's from the 1st century. That's from the Talmud. That's not to be made fun of. That's why Peter says scoffers. Okay, well, they've always said Jesus is coming. In Judaism, they've always said it's around the year 6,000, which is around the year now. Going over to the top of page 17, current biblical year on the Jewish calendar, 5785. Officially, Judaism says that this is the year 5785. There are some who believe that there are 165 years missing in the Hebrew calendar. There are 3 different links there. You can go to any one of them, and it will show you that these are years that seem to be missing. So it actually is, I have a typo there, it's not 5784 plus 165, it's 5785 plus 165, meaning that it's really about the year 5950, if those 3 are right. Okay, there is one site that says it's 240 years missing. Assume they're all wrong. We're still at the end of this period. You see the point here? I don't think it's wrong to be living like as Jesus said, when these things begin to come to pass, look up, for your redemption draws nigh. And it's really evident what he's saying there is look up with joy and expectation because the Lord is coming. That's the whole point. When these things begin to come to pass, look up. He's coming. All right. So I think, what's our biggest joy, it's him. Behold, I come and my reward is with me, Revelation 22. Anyway, I think that's an amazing video because you're hearing it from somebody who doesn't even believe in Jesus. And we are there. All right, so I'll take one question, just one, okay, because I want to have food time, fellowship time, and then we have prayer that starts at 6 o'clock, and I want to give you time to go to the table. Zach, did you have a question? Okay, go for it.
1,000-year reign, this time of Shabbat, do the Jews see any distinction between that just being a rest for the people of God versus the people that remain on the earth during the 1,000-year reign that were not following God?
Okay, so
remains therefore a rest for the people of God. But Zechariah 14, during that reign, you see that all the nations are required to return for the feast, and those that don't are then punished. So it would kind of indicate, that there's some distinction still between those that have followed the Lord and are now living or existing during that time, and those that are not.
There's so much to that. Okay, so I hope you ask that question again when we have more time. But what I would say is there is clearly coming whether you believe in a pre-tribulation rapture, a mid-tribulation rapture, a pre-wrath rapture, or a post-tribulation rapture. All of those, every one of them, believes that believers go up, and then believers come back, and we come back, and we're here for the 1,000 years. Which means that for that 1,000 years, there will be 2 human races on the planet. Those who went up, came back, and come back and get their eternal bodies. The resurrected bodies. When we see him, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. Okay, so the life of the flesh is in the blood. But Jesus said, he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. When Jesus rose from the dead, he had a hole in his heart. He showed them the hole. He had no blood in him. He couldn't have because there was a hole in the heart. The life principle of Jesus' body is him. And the life principle of your resurrected body will be him, not blood. When he comes back, I don't know if you'll have blood in you or not, but it won't matter. Because the life principle will not be blood. It will be him. So there will be 2 human races on the planet. Those who have already received their eternal bodies and those who have not. The ones who have already received their eternal bodies basically will not be able to sin. They will be living in this eternal state. Those who are on the earth, I think I'm going to your question now, those who were here and have their bodies like we currently have will be able to sin. And how do we know that? Because Isaiah says that he who dies during that millennium period, he who dies at 100 years will be thought of as a sinner. So there will be sin on the planet during that 1,000 years. And Jesus will rule and reign with a rod of iron, which means there will be quick judgment. It will not be like it is now. So there will be these two races, one that will not sin, and there will be another race that can sin. And eventually there will be another, as it were, resurrection, and the only thing left will be a single human race that is able to, in Revelation 21 and 22, the first three or four verses in both chapters, will say that God himself will tabernacle with us. There's the Feast of Tabernacles. But the tabernacles you're referring to in Zechariah is at the beginning of the 1,000 years. And in Revelation 21, and then again in 22, when it says God, 21 verse 3 says God will tabernacle with us, that's referring to at the end of the 1,000 years. And so Passover points to Jesus, Pentecost points to the Holy Spirit, and Tabernacles points to the Father, the three pilgrimage feasts that take us into God's presence. And when God is done with his salvation plan, every human being who is alive will have this eternal state, and no one will ever have a thought that is not worthy of his presence. No one will ever have an emotion that is not worthy of his presence. You will be, and that's why it'll say in Revelation 22, it's either verse 3 or 4, and they will look upon his face, referring to the Father. They will look upon his face. You will be able to look upon God's face, and you'll never have to think, oh, I shouldn't think that. That will be gone. That's God's plan.